Hi, everyone. This is John Daly. I'm here with my co host Thomas D. House for another episode of the Reagan Caucus podcast. Our guest today is a conservative commentator and podcaster whose work you've probably seen all over the place, including for major media organizations. He's currently a contributor for the LA Times, and he's very active on his Substack. It's called Matt Lewis and the Newsletter, and also with his podcast, Matt Lewis Can't Lose. I'm talking, of course, about Matt Lewis. Matt, thanks for joining the two of us today on the Reagan Caucus podcast.
Hey, John, and yeah, someone told me once if people have too much to remember, so you better whatever you have, name it after yourself. You'll be lucky if they remember anything. So,
Exactly. Good branding, smart branding. Well, it's great having you on. So I don't usually butter up our guests very much, Matt, but I consider you to be one of the most level-headed political commentators out there. You're frankly way too normal of a person to be doing this for a living, but I appreciate it for one. Um, but I wanted to get to some stuff you've been writing about and talking about quite a bit lately. You have concerns regarding freedom of speech in this second Trump term. I wanted to ask you first about the controversy with the FCC chairman Brendan Carr, ABC, and Jimmy Kimmel. Kimmel made some comments on his show, as we all know, about Charlie Kirk's murder and how some of the on the right reacted to the situation, and he made some inferences that weren't accurate. Brendan Carr then put some public pressure on ABC to punish Kimmel, and soon after, Kimmel was pulled off of television, at least for a few days. Now, I understand that as we've got more information, there's a good case to be made that ABC didn't actually factor Carr's threats into their decision. But I guess my personal take is that doesn't matter as much as the fact that Carr did this in the first place. He's the head of the FCC and he jawboned ABC. What is your take on all of this, Matt?
pretty much the same as you. Look, we have entered a different era. It's hard to imagine this happening anytime, like in my lifetime, most of our lifetime, certainly. I mean, it's um, you know, I, I think we were blessed, John, to kind of live in a era post World War II era where liberal democracy and presidents like Ronald Reagan, and we may in some ways be reverting back. I don't want to say that everything that's happening is unprecedented, but in my lifetime it is. It doesn't really matter to me what Kimmel said. Whether he was right or wrong, obviously wasn't a funny joke. I think maybe what Donald Trump was really mad about was the funny, something different that Jimmy Kimmel did, which was kind of funny, but also much more biting, is he showed a video of the press asking Donald Trump about Charlie Kirk, and Donald Trump immediately changed the subject to how great his ballroom is. It's like, how are you holding up, Mr. President, after the death of your friend? Have you seen the ballroom? Have you seen, have you seen the blueprints? It's going to be the best. A lot of people tell me the best. And I think that might have been the thing that actually, if anything offended Trump and Carr, it would have been probably that clip, not the one that they cited as the motive for uh, for pulling him down or for protesting about his commentary. But it doesn't really matter to me what he said. It's just not the business of government to intimidate and coerce like this. And if it happened in a vacuum, if this were the only incident, then it would be bad. But this is really pretty consistent with like a campaign of, we saw what happened with Stephen Colbert, and then you have Donald Trump coming out and saying like, watch out, Jimmy Fallon, you're next. So obviously this is part of a larger, broader campaign to purge the world of critics and then to chasten everyone else. It'll have a chilling effect. And so the fact that Kimmel survived, I think, is a kind of an important moment, actually.
Yeah, you wrote that you thought Kimmel actually handled. He came back. I don't. I think it might have even been less than a week. I might have that wrong, but you said that you thought Kimmel handled his return to television quite well. A lot of people on the right, and really not just the MAGA right, sort of disagreed with that. They pointed out some inaccurate statements Kimmel made and noted that he didn't actually apologize for his original statements. But you saw it sort of as, and I think I'm actually closer to you on this, but you saw it as sort of a net positive, not just for Kimmel, but for also for comedy and perhaps even politics. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, look, I would say to those watching or listening to this, if you haven't viewed the Jimmy Kimmel monologue from the night he returned, I think it's worth seeing. He had a difficult task because he needed to balance several things. I think he needed to display compassion for Charlie Kirk's widow, who, keep in mind, had just, I think, maybe the day before, delivered this eulogy where she said that she forgave his killer. And so I think that Kimmel needed to be compassionate toward her. I think he needed to tell the story about what happened and also put it in context of why this matters in terms of freedom of speech. But he also needed to be funny. You can't just be didactic. You have to be funny too. And so I think he checked all the boxes. He did everything he needed to do. I think it actually was funny. I forget the exact joke, but he made, just to give you an example, Brendan Carr, he said something like, he's the worst car since this one. And he put up a picture of like the Tesla truck, just
Yeah.
stuff like that. He didn't make fun of Charlie Kirk, but he did make fun of Trump and Carr. And I think he really laid out the case and in a way that comedy is, when comedy is good, it makes us think and makes us laugh. And I think the reason he was able to do that, when Kimmel comes back on, the first thing he says when he comes back, from being, on this hiatus, he says, as I was saying before we were interrupted, that's a line from Jack Parr, who was the second host of The Tonight Show, who stormed off stage after left The Tonight Show after censors took out one of his jokes. So Kimmel, from the first second he came back on stage, was citing and crediting comedians who had been kind of free speech warriors before. And in the course of his speech, he talked about Howard Stern, his monologue, he talked about Howard Stern, George Carlin, and Lenny Bruce. And John, growing up as a young conservative, I can tell you, and I'm from the DC area. I mean, Howard Stern used to be on DC 101, and he did this just horrible joke where there had been this really tragic, the Lenny Skutnik moment. You remember where there was this plane crash on like the 14th Street Bridge in DC? I think people died. They were, in the icy water, and this guy, Lenny Skutnik, like saved people, rescued them. And I remember Howard Stern going on the air and saying something about, I need to order a one-way ticket to the 14th Street Bridge, something like that. Just cruel, not funny. And I remember being a kid and people like Lenny Bruce and Howard Stern and then we had, other shock jock, like, or comedians like Andrew Dice Clay, who probably weren't even that funny. And I remember thinking, like, these guys are using freedom of speech as an excuse to be crude and rude and vile. But now I kind of see that, like, yes, I think that's true, but they were also kind of laying the groundwork. And I think someone like Kimmel studied Carlin and Bruce and Stern and how they cast themselves as these rebels who were taking on the man, the establishment. And that is what Kimmel did in that monologue. And that's the beauty of this, is that cast Donald Trump as the man, as the establishment. And it cast Kimmel and the comedians who were defying him as rebels. And I think that's a really important narrative, because it's very different than what we've seen in recent years, where Trump has cast himself as the rebel taking on the insiders and the establishment.
That's an interesting point. I mean, I've been arguing for a while that Trump, is the establishment. It's funny, but most people do not see it that way. I also thought it was interesting you brought up the Jack Parr quote. I thought it was, I found it sort of humorous when I saw online that when Kimmel said that, everybody was not everybody, a lot of people on the right were suggesting that he stole that from Trump. that line. I'm like, no, because I guess Trump used that same line after returning to wherever, that person had taken a shot at him. But I'm like, no, that Trump was,
People don't have
and
much
it's
historical,
no,
knowledge.
and it's I didn't even know Trump had said that until people kind of pointed that out. But I'm like, no, that's not where that line came from. That wasn't a Trump original.
Well,
Really,
it's
there really
funny
aren't
that
that many
Trump
Trump
knew
originals.
enough. It's it's funny that Trump knew the line to cite it,
Right.
which is interesting. I didn't know that either. I didn't know that Trump said that either. But like Reagan's "Honey, I Forgot to Duck" is a line from a movie. Maybe he might have even been in it. I'm not even sure if it was a classic or what movie it was. But these lines stick with us. And yeah, I mean Donald Trump is probably he certainly has blind spots, but he's probably more like Olivia Nuzzi years ago wrote about how he loved to watch Sunset Boulevard. Do you remember that? The old classic movie, which I think is a telling a little bit. You can draw some metaphors or whatever from that. So I think that Trump's knowledge of pop culture of a certain era is probably better than we give him credit for.
No, no, it sounds like it. I wanted to go ahead and bring in Thomas for some questions. Go ahead, Thomas.
It was interesting that the idea of you guys talking about Trump as being the establishment, and it seems very clear that at least on the side of the coercive arm of the federal government, he is the establishment. In fact, he's the most powerful president maybe we've ever had. He's powerful. His power exceeds his wealth and exceeds his office as well, because he has so much control over so many millions of people that we just have never seen before. I mean, that's my
Hmm.
opinion, that we've never seen that before. Elon Musk, it has very limited power compared to Donald Trump because of the way he's able to control so many people, and it's unprecedented. So, I mean, yeah, that's a very.
Yeah.
In what sense is he not the establishment now? I suppose maybe in the academic world, maybe is the the media, but then you have Fox News and these other podcasts that are the highest rated things in the media right now. Is there any sense in which he is not the establishment, or at least the biggest part of it?
No, look, I think you're entirely right, logically speaking, but perception is reality. And one of Trump's like weird magic tricks is being able to be, and this goes back to even before he was president, where he could simultaneously be the strongest man in the world and a perpetual victim. And like, how
Mm.
does he pull that? How can you be both? It doesn't make sense. But yet he pulled that off. And I think simultaneously he has become this incredibly powerful authoritarian like political figure who also casts himself as an outsider, outer borough guy, like just watching like you, just trying to
Mhm.
figure it all out. And it's pretty miraculous, but I think he has pulled it off. And to me, that's what is so important about the Kimmel moment. And Kimmel isn't. We've started to see hints of this, but I think Kimmel, um, at least for that one night, it was pretty clear that the folks like Kimmel were the rebels, the schoolboys sitting in the back throwing spitballs, and Trump was the authority figure.
Mhm.
And I think if I hate to say the left, but if the resistance, if the anti-Trump, that includes like conservative never Trumpers as well as Democrats, and if the non-Trump resistance ever wants to succeed, I think step one is sort of being cool again,
Mhm.
like getting their mojo back, being seen as like the rebel, because you're not going to be the man, but like if Trump gets to be the man and the rebel simultaneously, like
Mhm.
how do you defeat that? You're nothing. You're a weak nerd. And so if you can't be in charge, at least be the scrappy, cool underdog. And like honestly, I don't think that the non-Trump forces, the resistance, has had a lot of moments where they were. And so I feel like Kimmel at least for that night, sort of captured that high ground.
Yeah, definitely the anti-Trump resistance has a problem of keeping their powder dry. They end up strengthening Trump when they attack too much or too, for the wrong things. And I think, yeah, the idea of them jawboning TV, stations or sorry, networks, TV networks, is a real problem. I mean, that's a very serious issue if you're using those tactics. So this is a time to pounce, to really hit him hard on this, because that's inappropriate use of his power.
And I think I was listening to, I forget who it was. I would like to credit the person. It might have been like Sarah Longwell from The Bulwark, but I was listening to, I listen to so many podcasts, it's hard to keep track. Someone was making a really good point that, like, I think comedians are very well positioned to do this role. And that Kimmel was kind of, not uniquely, but like well positioned to be the person to go after Trump in this moment. Like, I think Kimmel, by virtue of being taken off air, was viewed as the victim. And then I think he had the rhetorical chops, by virtue of being a comedian, to come after Trump. The best way to come after any authoritarian type figure is with mockery and comedy. And so comedians, and we are in a moment now where, the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, is a former comedian. Joe Rogan, arguably the most, significant political voice, is a comedian. I don't think he's that funny. I think he's a better talk show host than a comedian. Theo Von is actually funny, legitimately funny, and he's also very important. So it is a moment for comedians, and it up until now, Trump did this amazing job, I think, in 2024 of miraculously kind of co-opting these people. But one wonders if he hasn't risked alienating them, not just by going after Kimmel. I think that was one of the things, but bombing Iran, kind of supporting Israel, which I support Israel too, but I'm just being an analyst here, supporting Israel the way that he has. That has certainly alienated people like Theo Von, who sees what's happening in Gaza. There have been a few things happening, maybe even the tariffs. I mean, they're bailing out farmers now. There are a lot of people who kind of like voted for Trump because they thought, Kamala was like a school marm, finger wagging hall monitor type person, and they thought Trump was cool because he would come on their shows. And now they didn't know that much about politics, and they're like, well, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't know he was going to come after like late night talk show hosts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I mean, I think it is appropriate too to identify that there has been a big change between the first term Trump and the second term Trump, in that some of the lack of success on the sort of resistance to Trump was, while Trump may have wanted to do things that were rather authoritarian, right? He was severely limited in the first term from actually accomplishing them, because he surrounded himself by old-fashioned conservatives who did not see that as appropriate things to be doing, and they were typically able to rein him in. So what would happen is you would warn about something. It'd be like you'd warn, oh, look what he says here. He wants to do these authoritarian things, and then people would see that they weren't done, and then it was kind of like the boy cried wolf kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But the story of the boy cried wolf. Eventually, there's a wolf.
Yeah, right. And I totally agree with you as an explanation, but not mm-hmm. as an excuse. I mean, mm-hmm. anyone who was paying attention, that's the key, knew who this guy was. When people tell you who they are, believe them. It's pretty obvious if you're paying attention that Trump wanted to do a lot of bad things, and that mm-hmm. The deep state or whatever we want to call him were hemming him in a little bit. It was pretty obvious when he tried to overturn a free and fair election and incited a riot in the Capitol that he was dangerous.
Yeah.
So I completely agree with you in terms of your analysis of what a lot of people were thinking.
Mhm.
I don't think that absolves them because, again, if you were paying attention, it was pretty clear. And, David Frum told me 3 or 4 years ago, I'm really worried about what would happen if Trump gets back in, because by then the velociraptors will have learned how to work the doorknobs. And that's precisely what happened. I mean, I think Trump, and this is not, an original thought or even shocking at this point, but, probably losing in 2020 was the best thing that happened for him, because now he's been a dominant political force for it will be like at least 12 or 13 years, hopefully, when it's all over, hopefully it ends. And his team, it's sort of like they got a halftime break where they could regroup, change the game plan. As a Redskins fan, Joe Gibbs used to, back in the old days when the Redskins were a great team, when the Redskins existed, they would come out in the second half and just destroy other teams, partly because the Hogs had worn down the defensive line of the other team, and partly because Gibbs had figured out a game plan. This is how we change things up in the second half. That's what Trump and his team got to do. So I guess in hindsight, maybe things would have, this sounds crazy to say, but probably, well, I don't know. Maybe things would have been better if he had just had 8 straight years. But again, it's impossible to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's so you brought up that thing about the deep state, and I was actually wanting to ask you about that because I think I underestimated how much of a conspiracy theory, how prevalent that conspiracy theory is among the MAGA right, and how powerful it is in their imaginations. But you grew up in the DC area, so let's just call it by the neutral term, the administrative state, right? So classical liberal conservatives, like Reaganite conservatives, have typically thought that it was too expansive and it needs to be trimmed down at the federal level. That and there are certain parts of it that need to be trimmed down, and then of course there are parts of it that are necessary that serve the purposes of the legitimate ends of government. But your experience living in the DC area, I'm guessing you lived in Northern Virginia.
No, actually, so I'm from Wolfsville, Maryland, which is about
okay.
about 80 miles northwest of DC. So we had, DC was our TV media market,
Mm-hmm.
but where I'm from, literally there were, I had a first cousin that I went to school with who didn't have indoor plumbing until we were in 7th grade. So there are people there who've never been to DC, or they might have gone
Mm-hmm.
once on a field trip. So even though there are other people who commute every day to DC, right? I mean, certainly now. Yeah. So it was, I'm from the DC area, but not really,
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. See, I used to live in Northern Virginia, in Fairfax and Alexandria and those areas, and
I live there too.
Yeah.
I've lived all over the area. I'm in West Virginia now, which is also the DC area, believe it or not. Where I live in West Virginia, I'm closer to DC than I was when I lived in Maryland, but I've also lived in, Franconia, Springfield, and Old Town Alexandria, and Delray, and Arlington. I get around.
That's right. So you've been around. So you've seen that. The way that the MAGA right talks about the deep state, it's just kind of funny. I mean, these are government bureaucrats.
Yeah. Well, I think
they're more concerned about just keeping their cushy job.
I think there's the deep state, and then there's the deep state
against the American people, or conspiring against Trump. Even they'd rather just keep their job. They don't want to get in trouble, right? Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I think the deep state is like everything else nowadays, which is there's the deep state, the X-Files, the old guy who would show up and tell David Duchovny things. There's that deep state, and then there's the deep state that's Reince Priebus. He's a Republican RNC chairman, chief of staff for Trump, but wasn't crazy. He's the deep state. I think low-level bureaucrats, the Department of Agriculture, who are not red-pilled, are the deep state. So the deep state's whatever you want it to be. Mm-hmm. It could just be mainstream bureaucrats who are apolitical. It could be Republican establishment insiders who just aren't crazy, or it could actually be nefarious, figures pulling, calling all the shots somehow, behind the scenes in the military or something. Like it
Mhm.
means a whole bunch of things. But I think for the most part, it's innocuous. It's just a great boogeyman to sort of cite, if you want a blame shift.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you did you see this report that because remember when Doge was doing its PR work trying to convince everyone they're really going to fix our fiscal problems, right? When the real clear intention was they wanted to have an opportunity to have more loyalists in the government. But one of the things they did was they offered these sort of severance packages for people to leave. And did you see this report that some of those people who agreed to these severance package are getting rehired now?
Yes. Do they get to keep the money? That's what I want to know. Do you
Yeah,
know?
that'd be interesting. It sounded to me like they did. So, I
It's a
mean,
good deal.
they'd probably spend it already, I guess.
I always thought that the best thing that could ever happen to you would be a buyout until I got one. It's like, but it seems like a great idea. It's like, we're going to pay you for the next 6 months not to show up.
Hmm.
But then I got one from the Daily Beast. I'm like, well, actually having insurance was nice too. But having a job was a good thing. But, we do what we can.
Hey, John.
Yeah, so I was wondering, wanted to ask you something kind of going back to the Kimmel stuff, but a different angle. So when his suspension was, the red hot story, a lot of people on the right were basically rationalizing what Carr did by saying, what about Roseanne? She was fired by ABC for something she said, and the left didn't care. That argument, of course, ignored the entire government involvement angle, which was really, for me, the entire controversy.
Yeah.
But I think there is sort of an interesting side discussion to be had there, Matt, about best practices when it comes to how private companies should handle provocative speech from their employees. Following the Kirk assassination, there were several stories, of course, about employers firing employees who celebrated Kirk's death online. We heard stories years before that where employers were firing people who, again, online in most cases, called George Floyd a thug after he died, was killed, or said, he had it coming, or something like that. I'm curious, Matt, how you see this topic. If you had people working for you who said these types of things, would you be inclined to fire them, or if not, what bar do you think is sensible? I know it's up to the employer, but I'm
Right.
curious what your thought on this is.
Well, that's a tough one, John. Let's unpack this a little bit. So the first point is the one you made, I think is crucial, right? Like the only thing that can censor you is government. Your employer can't censor you. It's not censorship, like technically, but a company, if you work for a company, um, certainly if it's like a public facing thing, and like let's say you're like a local law firm and you work for a local lawyer, um, but then you're going around saying like pretty hardcore, like, making political statements, like they can fire you because it's a private company. And you know but I think so the Kimmel thing is different, right? It certainly appears that Donald Trump, that this is an effort to silence one of Donald Trump's opponents, and that you've been using the term jawboning, but that like the FCC chairman is putting pressure on like networks and affiliates and whatnot to take him down, and to take him down like because Donald Trump literally started his campaign, saying like I will be your retribution, and really it's his retribution. And again, there's a pattern of him targeting and saying he's going to target. Like the latest is, of course, James Comey, where he does this all in public. He put out a social truth. I don't know what we're calling them, bleat, that said like, Pam, we're running out of time. You got to go after these very crooked. So it's obvious, right, that this is government coercion, going after Trump's enemies. So to me, that's different than the Roseanne thing, right? So when
Right.
the Roseanne thing happened, I think Trump was president when Roseanne
Yes,
was taken
he
down.
was.
So, um, Now, it's possible that there were prominent Democrats who were encouraging ABC to, to fire her, but I think that's fine as long as there's no, threats when we get back in office. Um,
Right.
I also think what Roseanne said was more egregious than what Jimmy Kimmel said, but that's debatable. I think that Kimmel, this is my take, the fact that he's a comedian and he was like on duty, basically attempting to do comedy on duty, is different than Roseanne tweeting some horrible thing about Valerie Jarrett on her own time. I think that like there should be some sort of an immunity for a comedian who's on air doing his job. His job is to be a comedian. He's on there telling jokes, and one misses. Now, the one weird thing about this, though, to your point, is like now we live in a world now where like every single person in America like has a megaphone and a TV camera effectively, and and a printing press in their pockets. And so this probably wasn't much of a problem in the old days. Like if your employee put up a Kamala Harris yard sign in her yard, would you have told her to take it down? Probably not. That would have been. But what if she's going on Facebook every day talking about how great Kamala is and how bad Trump is, and you live in a small town that's pretty conservative? Like this gets a little different. So I do think that we as a society are going to have, I don't want to say a national conversation, but we're going to have to figure out how we treat speech. And if we want to be, free speech absolutists, and like if any individual should be able to say whatever they want. I mean, like, I remember there was a story a few years ago where there was someone who was like an ambulance dispatcher at a hospital who was saying some racist things. And it's like, I don't necessarily want you I don't want my life on the line. You may not send help quite as quick because of the color of my skin. Like that's a problem that I think could undermine confidence in the institution and in healthcare, and certainly in your specific hospital. So to me, the free speech issue is nuanced, and I think there's a lot to discuss and debate. What's not debatable to me is the Jimmy Kimmel thing, which I think is a black and white issue.
Yeah, I think definitely complicated. The other areas are definitely pretty complicated. I did want to ask you about Brian Kilmeade, that situation on
Yeah.
Fox News. He recently made a horrific comment, on air. It wasn't a joke. I don't think it was a joke about euthanizing mentally ill homeless people. Ramesh Ponnuru at National Review described the remark as satanic. But it doesn't appear that Kilmeade really got in any trouble, a few days later. And it was kind of strange that it took a few days, but he did come out and apologize, and that was sort of the end of it. And I think, even a few years ago, if he had said that, I think there would have been. So I remember there was a time where Jesse Waters said something fairly crass, and he was taken off for a few days at the Five. But I don't think that's really the case anymore. Do you think that influential news organizations should take a harder line against speech as egregious as that, or is that maybe just the norm for cable news these days?
I don't think Kimmel would have said it a few years ago. Kimmel,
Or
not Kimmel.
Kilmeade, you mean?
Kilmeade, sorry, excuse me. I don't think Kilmeade. I don't think Kilmeade would have said this a few years ago. I mean, I've actually had Kilmeade on my podcast to talk about one of his books. Pretty nice guy. Oftentimes, he's kind of a voice of reason on Fox and Friends. I mean, I think that he obviously is aiding and abetting their agenda, but he's hardly the worst offender at Fox. Right. I think oftentimes I've seen examples of where he actually calls out Trump, in a mild sort of way, for overreach. And so I think that what's happened is that, like, in a way, there's a culture on the right and at Fox News where you're like incentivized to say outrageous, uncompassionate things. And so I wonder if this is revealing that Kilmeade has this hardened heart that's uncompassionate for the least among us, or if this is Kilmeade feeling like, in order to kind of keep my job, I have to like flex a little bit and sort of butch myself up a little bit. I suspect that's what it was. You know, when there is a culture that encourages, cruelty and toughness, you either, what is it? Tom Cruise says in A Few Good Men, you either follow orders or you pack your bags. So my guess is that this is a result of that culture, not Kilmeade specifically. And but I do think it served as a pretty stark dichotomy when you compare Kilmeade to Kimmel. And what Kilmeade said is worse than what Kimmel said, and yet the punishment did not fit the crime.
No, that's true. Just one other question. Another topic that's come up lately is with Joe Biden when he was president and Google. We recently learned that the Biden administration pressured YouTube into censoring COVID-related content out of a concern for misinformation getting out to people during the pandemic. Mark Zuckerberg had said something similar a while back about the administration had done something with Facebook, put that sort of pressure on too. What are your thoughts on this? I think we were talking about jawboning. I think there's a case to be made. Does Biden deserve some hefty criticism as well for going after free speech in that manner?
I mean, I hate to be nuanced because it's bad for business, John. Nuance is not good. But I have a little sympathy for Biden here, and I'll tell you why. Okay, so first let me say this did great damage. The fact that Biden did this, and it's known, is radicalizing a lot of people on the right. And I think it's the kind of thing that led to people like Joe Rogan and Theo Von supporting Trump in 2024, Trump promising to be a defender of free speech. So I think this was incredibly damaging. But, think of it from the standpoint of, let's give Joe Biden the best possible motives here. We've got this, once in a century global pandemic. And, depending on at what point this happens, like we don't quite know how bad it's going to be, but it's killing people. But then we've also got this weird scenario where like it used to be there were 3 TV channels and I could just go meet with the 3 presidents of those networks and let's have Dr. Fauci come in and brief them and then they can use their own discretion. But there's like everyone, back to something I said earlier, has a printing press and a network TV camera in their back pocket. And this misinformation could cost lives. And disinformation could cost lives. And if someone prominent is saying take ivermectin or vaccines cause autism, like that could have real consequences. And not just for the people who don't take the vaccine, but because of herd immunity for our civilization. So I think that it was incredibly damaging and it's very unfortunate, but I give I give Biden some grace here that like, it's a judgment call. I don't know where do you come down? Now, as far as I know, the Biden administration put pressure on these media outlets, but like, what does that mean? Did they threaten them or did they encourage them? And like, I don't think we quite know. I mean, I know Zuckerberg has gone on like Rogan and other shows and talked about how he felt, but yeah, that's subjective. Like to me, it kind of comes down to like the government has a responsibility maybe to encourage responsible what's the term of art, right? Because it's not censorship unless the government orders it, but moderation. I don't know, moderating of content. Like the government probably has a responsibility to encourage responsible moderating, but not to stifle free speech. And like, where is that line? But that's my nuanced or wimpy, depending on your perspective, take.
No, we love nuance here on the Reagan Caucus podcast because it really is, at least from my perspective, libertarians have taken sort of the real ones, not like the state party. Libertarians have taken on, sort of this hard line where I've seen some people say this is no different than what happened with Kimmel. Maybe, from a strict constitutionalist point of view, that may be true. I think with like you though, the motivations were very much different, and I think there is sort of a little bit of a sympathy that I feel.
Well, okay, so first of all, let's go to the motives.
Mhm.
The motive for taking out Kimmel is he was mean to Trump, right? Presumably the motive for stifling, irresponsible free speech having to do with COVID is to save lives. So the motives, just to begin with, are entirely different.
Mhm.
And then I would just argue, like, again, we don't know what was said behind the scenes to these social media networks. We do know what Carr said. We can do this the hard way or the easy way, right? And we know what Trump has said, even worse. So to me, and this one always, ticks me off about the people, the Trump, apologists, is it like, it doesn't matter how you stack it. You can try to play this other sideism. They started it. They like, just qualitatively and quantitatively, Trump is worse. And I would also say that to the degree that Democrats have done bad things, but just in a softer behind the scenes way, that's actually better too. That's better for the social fabric. Um, quietly encouraging someone to do something is better for society than publicly ordering them to or threatening them in broad daylight. I'm just sorry, it just is. It's better for, maybe neither is perfect, but it's just better for society.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thomas,
I would
did you
push
want to ask?
back. Yeah, I actually want to not push back so much, but you affirm what you said about how it ended up being very harmful. And I think that it wasn't just under Biden, it was the public health authorities when Trump was in office for the first time with Fauci. And I would see this a lot because, I was basically on board, but there was a sort of like platonic noble lie mentality that we don't want to admit anything that might get people to be more irresponsible as regards, the virus. And I think that I think that generally backfires. I mean, I think it's wrong. I think noble lie. I don't really believe in noble lies, right? I mean, there might be noble ways of saying some things and not saying others, right? Being prudent and whatever. But I think that backfired. I think the public health officials in the government lost a lot of credibility, and I think that's why we're dealing with this craziness on the Maha response, right?
Mhm.
People, it's a fallacy, right? They're like, just because the experts screw up and are dishonest does not mean we need to cling to these cranks who don't know anything, right? We need to improve the experts. We don't need to cling to the cranks,
Yeah.
but apparently, but that's where we are right now. People clinging to cranks because they see them as opposing these experts they're so mad at.
Absolutely. And just, going back to where we were earlier in this conversation, when I was pointing out Trump's ability to be the victim and the strong man, as, all these things, as you pointed out, like, all this stuff happened when Donald Trump was president.
Yeah, that's right.
Not all this
Operation Warp Speed was a good thing, and he
Yeah.
should be taking credit for getting credit for it as something he did well. But
I mean, Trump could have said, like, we're not going to shut things down. It's not happening.
Yeah.
But he didn't,
Mhm.
I mean, he was responsible. But the buck doesn't stop with him. So that's an interesting point, is that early on, in the COVID, I think everything you said is exactly right. Obviously, they lied to us about masks. That's a pretty clear example where they said you don't need masks. They're not going to help because they wanted. It was again the noble lie. They wanted to preserve them for like first responders, hospitals, that sort of thing. And then they said you got to wear a mask. And I don't know. My guess is the data may not back this up. I think masks probably did help, like a
Mhm.
little bit.
Mhm.
Um, but you know, um, it did this whole thing did huge damage. But again, let me just give a little grace because I think we forget where we were. I mean, there was a
Mhm.
point where I was putting my groceries in my garage for 48 hours or something, and then wiping them down because we
Yeah.
didn't know. There
Yeah,
was
we
I
didn't
wrote
know.
a column criticizing Ron DeSantis for opening up the beaches. Do you remember there was this big, I don't know if it's like a documentary or just a viral video on Twitter with all these spring breakers,
Hmm.
and they weren't just at the beach, they were partying in the middle of this like in the middle of this pandemic, and possibly spreading. And, now it seems stupid, right? What we know is
Hmm.
the best thing in the world was to get outside. But
Yeah.
early on, they didn't know that. And why
Yeah.
they honestly didn't. And I'll tell you, the reason that I didn't know that is that 100 years ago or 100 years earlier, during the Spanish flu, like the biggest outbreak was started at a outdoor parade in like
Hmm.
Philadelphia, outside. And so we see through a glass darkly. And I'm not sure that a noble lie is always a bad idea. Like I could probably think of a scenario like, what if we knew that 50 million Americans were going to die unless we told the public X?
Hmm.
Does that justify it? It's sort of like the whole thing of like, I'm against torture, but if a terrorist could tell me that, here's how we deactivate the dirty bomb that's about to go off in Midtown Manhattan in 32 minutes, would I be willing to like take matters into my own hands? Yes, I probably would, even though I think that torture is wrong. So, it was a rough time, and again, it's not like Donald Trump is on the high ground of being against shutdowns and school closures and masks and social distancing and 2 weeks to stop the cure or 5 days to end the whatever it was. Like
Hmm.
Trump should have been, by all rights, he was in charge of
That's true.
Dr. Fauci and all those people. Um, anyway, that's all as Forrest Gump might say, that's all I have to say about
No,
that.
that's a good point. I mean, those first couple months, we didn't really know much. I think the bigger problem was when we started to know more, and that we were still stuck on this inertia of what we were
Mhm.
doing up to that point. But you're
Well,
right. I mean, from the
and
time the pandemic hit to Trump leaving office, that was like 10 months. I mean,
yeah,
there was time in there that he could have made things better as far as that. Even
to
after he lost the
me,
election, he doesn't have anything to lose at that point. He might have done something differently.
the worst part is the school closures. It just dragged on and the school
Mhm.
unions who just kept it going. I mean, but to see, part of it is like my kids, were going to a Christian school in West Virginia. I was literally coaching Little League baseball in June of 2020. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Or probably in May of 2020.
Mhm.
So I wasn't, I have to remind myself that if I lived in New York City and I was trapped in a little apartment with 10 kids or something, with 2 kids even, it would be a different world than what I went through
Yeah.
out here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
well,
No. Go ahead, Thomas.
oh, John, I think we're at time here. So
Okay.
you want
Great.
to lead us?
Well, this has been a very I really enjoyed this conversation, Matt. I want to thank you for coming on the Reagan Caucus podcast. I recommend that everybody check out your Substack and also your podcast, Matt Lewis Can't Lose. I read and listen to them both, and it's always great talking to you. We'd love to have you back on sometime if you're
Love
interested.
it. My
Excellent, man.
pleasure. Thank you, John. Thank you, Thomas. And thank you, Ronald Reagan. Anytime.
Yes. And for everyone else, thanks for tuning in. If you watch today's episode on YouTube, we always ask that you make sure and like the video and subscribe to our channel and let other people know about us too. We always appreciate that. If you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or some other audio platform, please like and subscribe as well. And we will see you next time on the Reagan Caucus podcast.